Okay, so today, okay, I'm not sharing yet, but today we have a talk on the inputs on computing and software for the European Particle Physics Strategy Update by Tommaso Boccali, and from INFN Pisa, and possibly also joining us today will be Borut online, Borut Kazvan. And they were the conveners of the Software and Computing Working Group for this round of the European Strategy Update, and which consolidated the scientific input of the community on the matters of software and computing and particle physics for the Physics Preparatory Group, which was then specifically encapsulated this in the so-called Physics Briefing Book, which I'm sure Tommaso will tell us more about. So thanks everyone for joining. I will start sharing now, and then we can start. Yep. So give you the mouse too, because I think you'll actually navigate with the mouse. It didn't work.
I can remove this thing over here. There should be a way. Better. Let's say better. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I was looking into the Zoom and I think I know more than 50% of you, so it's a good number. So why am I here? You know that there was this process called the ESPP, which is European Strategy on Particle Physics Update. It was quite a painful one. I mean, not really because there were, at least from computing point of view, many controversies, but because it took a lot of time and it took a lot of effort. We are getting close to the end. And at least for computing, I would like to tell you a bit what we found, what we saw, and what we wrote in the physics briefing book, which is the thing which will remain for the next years, and some specific words about recommendations, which you probably have seen before because the document is in some form public since September, and we didn't hear anyone screaming too loud, so probably they were not too controversial, but there are still some space for changing. So let's just very briefly explain what the process is. It's a process which is called by CERN Council, where we are at some phase changes in the particle physics, especially at CERN. So this is a European process, and CERN is the lead of this process. So it's mandated by CERN Council. Strategy needs a broad consultation. Let's call it bottom-up if you want, but it's really full consultations from single individuals, researchers, states, institutions, and they are asked to provide input on a certain question, which changes from strategy process to the next one. And then there is a group which is called the European Strategy Group, which tries to merge, make uniform, if they are clearly, the ideas which are gathered by the community and try to propose something which is not automatically a decision by far, because the output of this group goes to the council. The council can eventually approve it or not. And then even at that step, it remains to speak with the ministries and so, for example, for the financial aspect. So the process is quite complex. If you want, as far as I remember, this is the fourth strategy happening for CERN. First one is one in 2006, and I honestly don't remember anything about that. It was about the physics case for high luminosity. So LHC was just to start and whether high luminosity was a good idea or not, but eventually we are here today trying to build it, so it was effective. In 2013, and this I remember better, there was the idea, okay, let's confirm and write in stone high luminosity, but then we need to understand what to do next. And at those times, I think that the most probable project was a linear collider in Japan, which today is a little less probability, I would say. Then we had an upgrade in Granada in 2020, where again, it was mostly about post-LHC. And there was the decision to fund an FCC feasibility study, which probably came out, I think, late last year or something like that. And this is one of the inputs to this year's strategy. And this year, what we were asked to do is to recommend for next large-scale accelerated project at CERN. Clearly, it's a European vision, but we cannot neglect what the others are doing. So in the global context of particle physics. The thing is organized in such a way that you have countries representative, but they need to be fed with somehow inputs from physics from the other points of view. So there is Carl Jacobs was selected as strategy secretary. You surely know him this time. And 9, if I remember, working groups about physics and physics at large, because computing, detector, and accelerator are physics, but they're not physics in the sense of exclusion plots and discovery plots were formed with a number of, they called them experts. They called us experts. I'm not sure whether we can agree with this definition, at least in my case, but this is what it is. And computing was chaired by me and Borut Kersevan from Slovenia. These are the names in the working groups. Internally, we decide to organize the work defining 5 sub-working groups, one about facilities, one about software aspects, one about AI, one about modeling, and one about new technologies. The most difficult to conceive and design was the AI one, because as you know, AI stays in all these groups. In some sense, you need AI also to optimize an accelerator or to design a detector today. But the final decision was that all AI stays in this group, and we have then links with the other groups. The tasks are analyze the inputs, prepare the symposium and foster discussion in Venice, and write the computing part of the briefing book, which is out again since September in some internal form and since the start of November in archive. So just to set the scenario, these are the proposed large-scale projects under consideration. There is a first wave, let's say, which is somewhere close to 2045, which is probably a little optimistic, but it's the first generation after high luminosity, which includes any plus and minus collider in a big tunnel. So dig the FCC tunnel and start building an electron-positron collider in that. There are the 2 implementations of linear colliders. This has been with us probably since 20 years, if not more, as design choices. And then there are 2 additional ideas for a reuse of the LHC tunnel. So going to the next generation without digging a tunnel, not linear and not even circular. One is to turn the LHC in what is called the LAP3, so an high intensity plus and minus machine, which covers at least the Higgs production. You remember that LAP2 was very, very close to the threshold, but unfortunately, some 10 GeV were missing. But clearly, you want also to go higher in luminosity, and then instead reuse the same tunnel colliding electrons and positrons, basically, to study similar things, but you can go with these machines, for example, to a more precise studies of the PDFs and these other kind of machines. This is the first wave. Nobody would really be happy with just limiting to this, because this just goes into the direction of precision Higgs physics. You want a second wave, which is, sorry, the word is lost, which is conceived as something which can collide partons being either leptons or quarks at this point, at the energy of some 10 TeV or more. And the implementations, the idea that have been presented were FCC-HH, so using the 90-kilometer channels of FCCE and build another machine on that, able to reach between 85 initially and then maybe some more energy. The muon collider is an idea which is with us since more than 10 years, but yeah, it's a little more R&D probably with respect to the FCC-HH, which today seems to be feasible with quite standard technology, or simply take the linear collider and make it either longer or change the cavities, or even go to plasma acceleration and try to make it higher energy. So these errors are not by me. This is the talk that Carl Jacobs gave at the public plenary ECFA meeting last Friday. So yeah, you build the first generation, the first wave, which is precision physics, mostly on the Higgs, and if you can, TT bar and WW and the Z. Then you need a path to evolve from this to the second wave. In some cases, it's sort of easy. If you have already dig the 90 kilometer channel, you reuse it for other machine. In other cases, well, you cannot use any more LHC at that point, so you need to have a new tunnel, which in most of the cases could be, I mean, it could be anything at this point. And just to set the time scale for these things are around 2070 or so. So not even me, but possibly my children will be retired by then. So we are building a very long direction strategy. So yeah, I'm not saying too much more about these things. I'm just saying that there is no decision yet. This is what is trying to reach a consensus next week. But again, even if there is a consensus, it has to pass through council, through the funding agency, and so. So this is just to set the scene. Clearly, all of these initiatives have computing needs, concerns, expected resource requests. So we had to tune them to see what was in the input to understand their feasibility. There is the zero wave that I have not written here. Clearly, many people give high luminosity LHC as a given. We know it's not the case. It's not the case, not even from the detector point of view. We know that in these days we are quite in big troubles with some components, but still we have to take data and analyze it and so. So wave zero, if you want, is in 5 years from now. Then we have the first wave in some 20 years from now, and some 40, 45 years from now would be the third, would be this second wave. Just one fast word about the process. This started in September 24, and everyone was asked for inputs. And said everyone could submit inputs. There were 266 inputs, and I think I put the link here. If you look, there are primarily related to computing and software, 37 of them. Then many others, for example, the national level inputs mention computing or end of line. So the number of documents which were considered is probably closer to 80, 100 or so. Then there was the Open Symposium in Venice in June, and I put here links to parallel and plenary sessions. Then we spent a very happy summer. Okay, no, then there was a first ECFA plenary talk by Ulrich, including detector and computing just a week after. This was just the afterthoughts of the symposium. Then we spent the summer in writing the briefing book. The briefing book was in CDS, I think, at the end of September, and as all the other working groups, there was a limit of 20 pages dedicated to computing. So on par on DSM, dark matter, accelerator, and detectors. After the first round of comments, the briefing book went to archive. It's the start of this month. Then the results were presented last week at the ECFA plenary, and here we are. And I will comment about the future at the end of this talk. So essentially, what do you need to do physics in our environment? Well, you need a collider, you need particle detectors, you need the electronics, you need the computing software at various levels. Clearly, you need physics modeling, because just counting the zeros and the one is not really helping anyone, and you need a model for analysis. So once upon a time, we would have said that maybe the last three are really important for a computing and software working group. Today, the situation is quite different, as we said. Also, in order to optimize a collider or to optimize particle detectors, in the end, you need lots of computing to model the beams, to model the optics, to understand the beam behavior, to decide how many detectors to put and where to put them, to have various analysis capabilities and so on. And even more if you want for electronics and readout trigger. Already in high luminosity LHC, the electronics and readout are very close to computing in the sense that they have a huge computing power, which is not the case with the previous generation of experiments. And in some cases, they use very similar architectures and solutions. For example, in high luminosity, we will see artificial intelligence at the trigger level, which was before high luminosity. And for example, CMS already had something now in run 3, but I mean, most of these things are not happening up to now. So it's a new thing from high luminosity. So let's try to define the timeline, and I put here the parallel between detectors and computing. So if you look into the briefing book, it's designed in eras. So you have 3 or 4 eras. It really depends on if you are looking into detectors, computing, or something else. Clearly for detectors, era 0, which means designing detectors for Atlas and CMS, it's basically done. Well, we were assuming it was basically done up to a couple of months ago, let's say, but in the end, the phase is R&D concluded. You could be late prototyping for some pieces, or you can even be in mass production. So there is not really a lot to be done there. While in computing, you know that computing procures the machines as late as possible, probably 1 or 2 years before they are really needed. So we are still designing the roadmap and performing data challenges to try and improve it. We were able to process the data. The era 1 is, let's say, around 5 onward, where we could have upgrades for LHCb and DALIS 3. They are yet to be finally approved, and they come with serious computing requirements. But I also need the detector R&D, which is already happening. Then at some point you stop LHC and you go to the next one, which is said 2045 plus, and you have a first wave, which is what it's usually called HET, the Higgs electroweak top factories. So you want to have precision physics at these specific energies, or, and this is in the initiative that I showed you before, a reuse of a lab tunnel with other ideas, for example, E plus E minus in LHC, or an electron proton collision machine. And then you have to follow via this era 3, which is 10 plus TeV partonic center of mass energy. So what is happening, and this is instead the same between detector and computing, basically you need to use the previous era as a baseline for the next one. You cannot really think of being able to process FCCHH today if you haven't seen high luminosity in action, for example. The same as you cannot start building detectors for FCCHH if you don't have a previous established baseline for that. So the process is really changed. You have to go through all the steps. You cannot really think of, okay, let's keep some of them and let's go directly to the big target. So this is the briefing book. As said, there is this computing part. This contains, on top of all the things we just said about the sub-working groups, also some more overarching themes like the need for long-term data preservation and the tremendous situation we are with carriers. And this last point is basically in all the chapters, more or less. It depends on how much space dedicated to this, but this is the case. So where do we start from? Clearly, we are not starting from scratch. More or less, the computing for LHC has been interruptedly operating since the first beam. Indeed, before that, because we had all the sets of data channel. I think the first thing I did in CMS as computing was in 2004 with the data challenge 4, which is 21 years from now. And this is the plot that Simone Campana usually shows at the RRBs and the LHC. You see that basically there is no pausing moment. Even when the accelerator is off for 2 years, we keep crunching stuff basically uninterrupted. So this, I think, is a very large success story of CERN. And this is something on which I can tell you now, even if it is in a later slide, all the future initiatives are trying to build upon. Every initiative assumes that WCG will survive at the end of LHC and will be available for them for simulation studies, commissioning, and then eventually for data taking. Clearly, what we call the app computing at CERN or WCG, they're not really synonymous, but they're very close, has evolved a lot. The thing you had running in 2004 or 5 is very different from what we have today running. We had only own system by then. We were using, I think, Scientific Linux 3 is the first thing I can remember. We were using single process executables, while today we basically have, which can contribute to this plot, grids, clouds, GPUs, supercomputers, filter farms where they're not being used for anything else. And this was really an adiabatic process in the sense that it said you couldn't really afford stopping for 1 year and then redeploying something completely different. If you want to have a look at how resources really evolved, we tried to have some numbers. So this is for example, this is CMS pledges for disk, tape, and CPU from 2009 to today. This is log scale. So the 3 lines you see are exponentials at plus 10% per year, plus 20% per year, plus 30% per year. So the message you see is that overall in 16 years, we somehow fit between 20% and 30% more per year. Atlas is very, very similar. But if you really focus on when things became to be stable at the end of run 1. So if you just zoom, let's say, from 2013, 2012, or whatever to now, the increase has been much smaller than this. It sits between 15% and 25%. So it's very reasonable. And we used to say that this is compatible with the famous flat budget, which means, well, if you asked in year 2013, X amount of money for computing, you cannot really expect to have more in the following years. So you have only to base your computing models on at most the same amount of money per year. While doing so, in the period 2009 to 2025, it really depends a bit on the experiment. But the number of pile-up events, at least in Atlas and CMS, per collision increased by a factor 60. We were at 1 in 2009, we are at 60-something today. And the trigger rates have increased by a factor 100. Again, just between quotes, with this increase in resource needs. This was helped by the decrease of prices in IT technology, clearly. We were very, very lucky at the start of the century, which decreases year over year of the order of 20, 30, 45%. Now we are a bit less optimistic, and these are last numbers that were shown at the RRB. We cannot really count on technology for more than, say, 10-5% per year. So this is a problem for luminosity, and we'll come to this in a moment, because it doesn't really help us to go along. But then you have surprises, because as soon as we decided to go down in WCG estimates to some 10-5% per year increase from technology, this year, apparently, we had a very good situation in which the increases which were much more than this. So we'll need to revisit the situation year over year, but it's, well, for once, we had a nice news. Okay, so let's start from the modeling. The modeling we received from the inputs to the strategy. Well, most of you have already seen these plots. These are a bit old. Newer version of these are expected, let's say, by 2026. These are the famous resource needs plots from Atlas and CMS. Here you have some data series, which are the needs depending on some assumptions on, for example, R&D that you are able to sustain. Then you have the exponentials, which are, again, the expected year-over-year increase in technology. And so the decrease of price year over year. And here you see that they are still the optimistic ones, because these plots are from 2022. But overall, if you were in this business, let's say 2015 or so, the situation has incredibly gone better. The message from these plots, if you just want to look at from a very large distance, is that if your points stay between those exponentials, you have some hope that the flat budget model can still hold. So you will not need to go to your funding agencies and ask for a factor 4 or 5 more money. Well, apart from some plots, for example, the tape one, but tape in the end is not so expensive. So this is the first thing we got in the inputs. We got all the modeling from from Atlas, from CMS, but also from ALICE 3 and LHCb upgrade 2, if they are approved. And well, ALICE, for example, provided this very nice set of plots, which really goes from 2018, which is the end of run 2, down to 2041, if you follow all the x-axis. And you see that it basically fits some decent exponential, which is not incredibly high. It's a 15% growth, which is already very nice modeling for a thing which is not going to happen before 15 years from now. LHCb roughly goes to the same date. 2048 today is declared as the shutdown of LHC. Then we'll see what happens, but you model just up to this. And you also see that, okay, maybe the effect, you need a somehow steeper exponential, but the effect is still sort of exponential. So which is the message here? Well, they are not going to the roof, but it's still problematic. Even more if you think that you have to decrease all the exponentials in this and this plot, for example, from technology down to 5% instead of 20%. The message that we try to pass is that even the closest high luminosity is not a solved problem. You shouldn't stop investing in R&D on these things, because otherwise it's even possible that you have to limit data taking, limit the physics outcome due to this. Well, the clear reason is that proton-proton radii-ion is a much worse environment than in plus-minus. So it's very difficult to get to the same numbers with the electron-positron machines, and you will see the plot in the next slides. Apart from some peculiar cases, the TeraZ, which is the attempt to do 1 million of LEP equivalent, so collecting 10 to the 12 Z at FCCE, well, clearly the events are small, but it's still 1,000 billion. So if you sum them up and you sum them up with the Monte Carlo, the problem becomes big. The main reason why high luminosity LHC is problematic today, well, there are two of them. First of all, you increase by a lot with respect of today. You increase pileup, you increase the detectors, there are a lot more detector channels. But then the real big problem is that this is close in time. So technology is not really helping you. We have just 4 nominal years from now to the start of the commissioning run of LHC, which probably means that you have to buy machines even earlier. So it's the effect of price reduction, unless there are miracles, is not really clear. And then, as said, today the economic price evolution of hardware is not really helping us. So if you had to redo this Atlas plot today, this is from 2022, probably the plot would be the same. And this is already a big reason to say, please give us R&D, because you really want to be on the red dots and not on the blue ones. Otherwise, you need another factor 2 of resources, which is in the end another factor 2 of money. There is no real miracle here. And the other thing is that those two exponentials would drastically go down. So we are not safe. That's the message we are trying to convey. Then you go beyond that. You go to ERA 2 and ERA 3 experiments, and we have to thank all the initiatives because they were very patient with us. We had to call them many times, ask for details. The inputs were not at the same level of readiness, which is clear because FCCE has been studied since years, while FCCE or the LEP3 or the Muon Collider are somehow newer ideas and they haven't reached yet the same level of maturity. So in some cases, we did just plain extrapolations, like take FCCE and downgrade it to LEP3 and see which would be the needs. So there are many numbers in this table, but you probably want to focus on the CPU requirement and the storage requirement of these initiatives beyond the high luminosity. So the very good news is that most of the numbers are indeed smaller than high luminosity. This is high luminosity at the end of the lifetime, so somewhere in 2041. Which means that if we are able to take home high luminosity LHC, we have a good chance, let me not be more positive than this, to take home also these initiatives. But then there are a few red numbers. Well, one is basically linked, as I was saying before, to the TeraZ. The TeraZ at FCCE takes more than the end of high luminosity. I will have a better plot in the next slide. But then you start to see numbers in which you really have to count attentively the number of zeros because they start to diverge and you really don't understand what it means. So this is 4 zettabytes for FCCHH, which triggers the usual, oh my God, what the hell are you saying? This is not possible. But then you look and this is probably in the end of the lifetime of this machine. So it's probably 2100. So it's something which is 68 years from now. So, well, reasonable numbers, take them with a grain of salt. So it's not much to be worried today. So these are the biggest bottlenecks and major challenges that we saw from these initiatives. I said the Tera-Z boson. And if you look inside the numbers, the problems don't really come from the number of Z's that you want to collect, but the number of Monte Carlo events that you think you might need to do the precision physics in this situation. And here you have some scenarios in which Monte Carlo is the same number as data, or you did 4 times Monte Carlo than data, or 10 times Monte Carlo than data. And as you see, these are the scenarios which are diverging from what technology can realistically give you. Clearly, this is, as far as I understood, an initial conservative estimates. First of all, nobody really knows how much you will need from this, how much Monte Carlo you will need. And second, clearly, these assume that you need to save this Monte Carlo, which, well, yes, it's a reasonable idea today, but who knows? In 20 years from now, we will be able to process on the fly events enough fast that you don't really need to store them, and you can just do it every time, do them every time. Already today, we have some flash and fast-based simulation which are not ready, but if you believe in AI, it could be a solution to this kind of processes. For the muon collider, the biggest problem is that muons tend to decay, and tend to decay wherever they want, not really where you'd like them to do it. So you have this beam-induced background, which are really polluting your detectors with signals. And the simulation and reconstruction number take into account this effect. But clearly, yet, as far as we understood, there has not been a strong attempt to try and clean these things before you take data. For example, decayed muons could be not precisely on time with your event. So if you have detectors which have good timing capabilities, you could try and remove some spurious hits before really processing them. This brings down all the numbers. For FCCHH, to a level, you cannot do anything. I mean, the events are big, the events are many. And the two orders of magnitude with respect to luminosity, if you look with attention, they come, well, a factor 10 comes from the fact that events are fatter. You have 5 times more minimum bias, and being high energy, there are more tracks per minimum bias. So if you put everything together, there's a factor 10 more hits. But again, these assume that you have no smart pileup suppression in place, which it's already feasible in high luminosity. You could take out, if you believe it, or if you think that this thing will evolve, for example, hits from tracks which are from pileup events which are not perfectly on time. So the effective pileup that these detectors could see could be smaller than the real pileup. The other factor 10 roughly comes from the fact that the Higgs boson is not going to change its mass. So you need physics and you need threshold with the same level. So if you increase everything by 10 times, roughly, or the cross-section by 10 times, roughly the cross-section from W to electron with a given threshold will be the same, and you get 10 times more events. So you have to scale the 10 kilohertz from high luminosity to something like 100 kilohertz. But still, this, in the opinion, and the case where you want to do exactly the same physics with FCCHH as of today. Maybe we have, maybe it's not so needed. Maybe the core physics we want to do there is slightly different. And there is another plot we found, which we always find very funny. I think the trademark of the sentence comes from Michelangelo. So if you take the distance from now to 2100, it's roughly the distance from the end of the 50s to today. And if you really had to model today the computing of high luminosity at sea, probably your biggest question would have been, how many trees do we have to cut to print enough punch cards? Clearly, it didn't go this way. So on the time scale, we can extrapolate, we can faith in our extrapolation, but on a time scale, which is 50 years or more, things can happen. So this is probably something we don't really need to worry too much now. Let's go more directly to the findings and the recommendations in the other 5 sub-working groups, the other 4 sub-working groups. So this was the modeling one. Clearly, there is an infinite number of things you want to consider. I don't have time to go all over them, so I just selected a few facts from each of the working groups. Software, this is probably the one which is more interesting here. And here there are verbatim some sentences from the inputs we got. All of them go in the direction to have as much as possible common software. I think is a lesson we understood with LHC when we started in 2004. Probably only Geant was really, and some WCG middleware was really the foundation of all the 4 experiment stacks. By now, we realized that there is really no need to have 4 engines for geometry, 4 engines for anything else. So this seems a very good direction to go, and we have in the number of products that the experiments depend today, there are many things which are really becoming common. The last wave was to try and go in common with data management, which is now at least used by 2 experiments, but is already a factor 2 before more than what we had before. The App Software Foundation has been really instrumental in fostering these kind of ideas, in having people speaking together. So we thought we should define it in the text as a good example of collaboration that should go on. Another thing which everyone thinks that will happen for either political or technological reasons is that we cannot really think that we will have one single model of computer with a single model of chips, as we basically had in 2004. It was Linux boxes with SL3 and, well, I think it was only Intel at those times. I'm not even sure that AMD CPUs were really relevant at that point. So all the machines were exactly the same. This is not happening anymore, but since years at this point, because we had to use and try to see if GPUs were usable for us. Again, there is a technical but also a political view on this. Then centers become to evaluate ARM chips with the promise that they would reduce the TCO because they were assumed and probably they were using less CPU than today. Another wave is probably coming again for political reasons, at least in Europe. Next systems, which next mean probably in 10 years, will somehow need to use solutions based on sovereign technology. And clearly x86 is not. ARM, well, maybe it depends if you consider these British or Japanese, so your mileage may vary, but RISC-V is probably in the world of architecture design seen as the solution long-term because this is really open source design. And well, GPUs are today the best bang for the buck. And if you want to spare money, this is what you're interested in. This link shows that there is still a fact. Oh, I don't have the dates and it's way too small to read, but there is, if you just count the flops and you assume that you are able to use the flops, and there is a big if in this, there is sort of a factor 10 between what the GPU can give you per dollar and what the CPU can give you per dollar. Then, yeah, if you want to go in this direction, you have to face the fact that by now you have large experiment code bases, 5 to 10 million lines of code, mostly C++ with Python and some Fortran, and that's it. And clearly, we cannot port them every 5 years whenever a new technology comes out. So experiments are already looking into higher level frameworks with somehow promise, and if you trust the promise, that some code that you can write today can be still efficiently enough run executing in some years from now. These are some plots of the efforts which are being done. Supercomputers, this is another thing which probably if we could, we would avoid. I mean, we are very happy in having our farms, our clusters. The problem is that if funding agencies start to stop funding them, we have to find another solution. And in Europe and US, one of the directions that our funding agencies are trying to show us is to use supercomputers, the HPCs. They are nasty beasts, I would say, because they are not thought for our use case, at least initially. They are thought for very closed and tight software, no data management, no external interactions. This is very different from what we do. We need to move data around. We need to be able to steer processes from outside. Efforts are going on here. And all the experiments have by now is sizable, which means, well, Atlas probably is higher than everyone else. I would say the others are at the level of 10% or less utilization of HPCs for their needs. But we expect that this thing will need to improve. And for this, there are initiatives. I'm mostly citing those on the European side because this was the European strategy, but also on the other side of the pond, there is the DOE IRI, which is starting to see if there could be some homogenization or standardization about supercomputing centers, and tries to speed up a bit. For quantum, well, clearly, it really depends on what you think at this point. Quantum can be next day or can be never. It's a matter of opinion at this point. I was one assuming that it was just a joke, and probably 5 years ago I changed my mind. I think it will come at some point. It's most probably not compatible with the luminosity era. One can question whether it is also with the next era, but at some point it can be there. We are putting some effort in this. We had lots of inputs for this. And what we wrote in the document is that we think it's somehow reasonable to put some 1% of our effort in these kind of things. Because if it happens, it's groundbreaking. If it doesn't, it's still interesting from the academic point of view. But the only thing we don't want is to be caught unprepared. So tomorrow IBM gives a press release saying, oh, I have the computer, please use it. And if we have nothing to do with that, then it becomes our fault. Just a fast plot here. In the end, it's not only about having cheaper computing, because as of today, there is the assumption that quantum computing will be orders of magnitude less energy hungry than the rest. So again, a reason to look into that. I will skip a couple of things and go directly to recommendations from the briefing book. So, about facilities, one strong recommendation is to secure the WSTG continuity, because as I said, all the initiatives are basing their computing on the assumption that these will continue the day after LHC is closed. They don't want to restart from scratch, which means somehow DL in WSTG, which means LHC will become obsolete. So we have to understand what to do with that. And expanding collaboration seems a good idea. In 2004, we were basically alone doing complex things from the scientific computing point of view. Now we have astroparticle, for example, SKA. SKA in the 10, 15 years time scale will not be so much different from us. And then expanding means, again, going to astroparticle, going to nuclear physics, and going to EuroHPC. For software, the recommendations have been to encourage the adoption of a portable programming model and abstraction layers. And while not written, I would add it would be very, very nice if our experiments could decide on one or two of them instead of going into all the possible directions. Probably this starts to be the moment in which this can be done. And well, let me just show this point, because this is probably something I want to ask you at the end here. Because for detectors, we have those famous DRDs, which are the detector R&Ds, which are real collaborations, in which you have institutes participating, for example, in silicon detectors or gaseous detectors or whatever. In Venice came the idea, if we are convinced that computing has the same criticality as a tracking detector, for example, we should probably follow a similar direction. So form something which collects all the efforts in the community and tries to a funded entity. I mean, so there is real money in that, and try to go with that. So these are the software recommendations, but I already highlighted the most important of them. For modeling, as said, well, please don't consider high luminosity a solved problem, because otherwise we'll find ourselves in big troubles in 5 years. And for biotechnology, what I just said it's probably worth to dedicate a small fraction of our computing manpower, person power, to this kind of efforts. Just another 2 or 3 slides, and then, sorry, I'm 5 minutes late, but I'm just going to...
No, you're good.
Okay. This came out everywhere. If you look at the Granada report, and this is the Granada report, it was citing a flawed academic hiring model in which computing and instrumentational professionals, they were together in Granada. They don't find solutions, they don't find career paths, and the result, well, they go away. It's very sad to see that 4 years later, all the inputs were basically saying the same thing. So if there is an improvement, it's very small. Probably there is really no perceived improvement in the situation. If anything, the world has gone into a direction where at least the computing experts are more attractive for industry than they were in 2020. So it's easier for them to find another path. So if you want if you just want to put together in a single sentence what we wrote, is that in the long term, our capacity of attracting professionals, give them a good career path, is more worrying than technology trends. Because we can find very nice solutions to have faster software, common software, faster computers, but as of today, you still need someone operating them. So this is one message we want there. Then compulsory slide about AI. Again, you may like it or not, but AI has been declared essential in the future for all possible domains, subdomains in our field, from design detectors, operations, triggers, reconstruction, simulation, analysis, theory. They're now trying to build theoretical models based on AI. You have to see also AI in the frame of what is happening in Europe. Europe is building 19 AI factories, which are large systems AI-oriented, which means the CPU is only used to switch on the GPU, mostly, and to feed some data to that, but then either you can use the GPUs or you do nothing. And clearly, AI is a very easy way to use GPUs. Let's say most of the work is done by TensorFlow or PyTorch, which we don't need to consider. We need to deploy models for that. And these I added for last week for the ECFA plenary. There was an initiative just launched, this is start of November in Europe, which is called AI for Science, AI in Science. So this is not research in AI, but how to apply AI to sciences. And you would think, wow, this is incredible, very good. We go there, we take the lead, we explain what we need. We were basically not invited. This was all about healthcare, material science, meteo. So we need still to carve our space, at least in Europe, as stakeholders in this kind of fields. And this is clearly a political problem, not really a technical one, but something on which we feel that we should advise the Council about. So Council, please use your power to try and show European Commission in this case, that we exist, that are important. This is my very last slide, and I wanted to ask you a question. We can do it in the comments, we can do it later. So what we tried overall, if you look at this thing, is try to explain that computing, software, AI are for future experiments the same level of importance and criticality of detectors and building an accelerator, which was not the case before. I mean, you don't remember because you're young, but maybe the older guys in this virtual room remember that, well, you were building a detector and then afterwards you were thinking, okay, now you have to prepare something to analyze data. It's not the case today. If you don't think and do R&D for a long period of time, you will never accomplish this kind of big things. And we were saying, why not use the DRD model? So this detector R&D model also for software and computing. Then in the afterthoughts, people started to tell us, think of what you're doing, because the DRDs are too complex, too slow, too expensive. So maybe we need another way, but please still consider the message. Do we want to have something which is centrally funded? No, not centrally funded, centrally organized and funded by funding agencies, by institutions, which tries to put order in this disaster of future computing. Today's computing, I think we can handle quite well. but next round of computing could be more difficult. So one question which you have basically 1 week to answer, if you want, is what would you like to see in the final recommendations, which you have not seen here? And then, why 1 week? Okay, this I cannot skip because I already said. Next week, we have the drafting session in Ascona, so south of Switzerland. We have to draft the recommendations to the council. Clearly, the most important recommendation is if you build it straight or you build it circular, and then what you build. So just to make it trivial, the thing. And there's nothing I can say about this because it's not decided yet. But clearly, computing will play a role. It can be more difficult, less difficult, can be using existing infrastructure, can need completely new infrastructures, and these will also need to go in the final recommendations. To be honest, I'm a bit optimistic from this point of view, because if we go back to this number, I think that if you just remove some extreme cases here, I don't think we are in the position of saying that no, you cannot even think of FCCHH because computing will be impossible, or don't do just a random one, a linear collider, because we cannot process the data. Instead, go to this other. So we are not in the position of saying that something is impossible at this moment. We are in the position of saying that something will be very difficult, and this triggers for R&D mostly. And that should be it.
Thanks. Great. Thanks a lot for the very, very detailed.
And if you have time, weekends or whatever, I really advise you to read the briefing book, at least the computing theory part. I mean, it's scary because it's 320 pages, but I think 50% of them are the bibliography.
Okay, and we actually do still have a week to provide input, so there's still a timely summary.
No, okay, but again, things can also come afterwards, but this is the time scale for this thing.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, we already have some questions from people, so I'm just gonna see who it is. And Katerina is top of the list, so she can ask first.
Sure, I just wanted to comment on the impact of AI in all of this. I don't think there's some background information that I know from Maurizio at CERN that I don't know if I want to share or not, but basically it's the lack of mention of AI in HEP, for HEP in the AI for Science strategy is maybe attributed to choices that CERN has made into joining or not joining ELIS, the machine learning.
Beware what you are saying, Katerina.
Yeah, I know. I'm very aware. This was said in public. Like, it's not something that is I'm just messaging things. But I think there is, and what I said afterwards is the thing that I wanted to bring up is, okay, sure, we can cry about this or we can do something about it. And the way to do something about it, I think, is something that the HSF has already started. So let's try and say we're never going to be machine learning. Well, maybe some of us, but not the majority of us is not going to develop the largest models and make the breakthroughs in machine learning. We are going to be using those tools. In order to use those tools, we need to set up the computing to use those tools. We need to make it easy for people to implement these things. So I think this is the way potentially to get back into the
Katerina,
AI.
I realize now that I forgot to comment on this upper right thing. This is one input. This is from EUCAIF, which is the European Coalition for AI and Fundamental Physics, and they are proposing a structured approach to this, which is towards the experiments, but also towards the outside. Sorry, I was too fast on this, but it's
but I think this all makes sense. It's just that we don't need to. I mean, one thing that also we're not really considering is how fast this will grow. I'm not saying that this is something that we should, mention in the briefing book or in the recommendations, but we have to be aware that this is a very, very fast-changing world. And if we say we're going to do the same kind of AI we're doing now at FCC, we're probably wrong, the same as everything else. So I think it's an intermediate step between now and quantum computing. And I think the way to go in for particle physics is to show how good we are at doing production code rather than doing extreme stuff. Maybe a bit of both, but I would, from HSF perspective, I'd go more in the production and the careers training. That kind of thing really sets us apart from other fields, I believe.
I don't think I need to answer. I completely agree with you, Caterina, and so on.
John, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I also agree with Caterina there, and just coming, I think it was by the way, it was a really clear presentation, and I think the report is good overall. I think there are three things I would pick out from it. Two of which I think you've done well on, you've highlighted well. One of which I think is actually a missed opportunity that I hope can be corrected. So I think that what Caterina just said about production code and career development, and what you said about career development being a main concern, is absolutely true, and it should be a strength of the field. And at the moment, it's looking like a weakness. So I think, and I think the caveats you've heard about DRDs, I sympathise with them. I'm not sure that's the way to go, but I do think some central, I wouldn't call it a DRD, but some central coordination on the career element in particular would be really valuable, and really just stop everyone just saying, oh no, we're worried, we must change, and actually have some central coordination and some strategy behind that, rather than worrying about the individual technologies, but think about a strategy for careers as a field. I think would be really important, and that some central coordination there would really help, I think. On AI, there's probably enough been said. I think it links to that, and I agree that it's concerning that we're not seen as being a leader in that, but we should be seen as leaders of implementation of that and exploitation of that. And the missed opportunity, I think, is, and here I have a declaration of interest because I was the author of the input on reinterpretation software. I really think that there's an opportunity for the field to take a lead in responsible computing in terms of the open source, open access, reinterpretable, reproducible science, the whole FAIR agenda within Europe. I think we need to do that ourselves because we need to get the most physics from our data. But I think also we have an infrastructure that can do that, and we should think about that from the beginning. There is a sentence in your report on that, but it's one sentence in one subsection of a subsection, and I would like to see it more prominent, because I think the field, again, because of its coherence and its strategic view, could really take a lead in that. And I think actually it couples with AI, the interpretable, reproducible analysis and public trust in software and computing is going to be an increasing area of concern and priority. And I think we should be using what we can do now to get into that early, and it will also benefit our science, but I think it will also benefit Europe and society to make that more prominent. So I hope, but it's overall a really good report. I realize it's a very tough job, but I hope that last point can maybe be brought to more prominence next week.
Yeah, message taken. Thank you.
Andrea.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So first, thanks Tommaso for the very nice talk. I was just curious about this DRD, since you actually spent some effort, some emphasis on saying this for next week. How do these DRDs work in? I've never been involved in detector work, and in particular in this thing. So what is the governance of this? How are they funded?
That's probably the
who
point.
Shares them? Are they typically CERN things? Are they outside CERN? Are they experiment driven?
So
what could be done in practice?
I tell you what I understood, because also myself I'm not in one of these, but they are big things designed very close to experimental collaborations. So they have a full management, they have overview boards, they have their equivalent of the LHCC. So this is why some people are warning us, maybe you may want something leaner, because this is really heavy. They are big. For example, the DRD on silicon detector, I think it includes 150 institutions, which is probably a close number to what we have in LHC experiments. So they are difficult things to handle and to manage. Funding comes right now, and this is just the first 3 years, then who knows what to this. Well, directly from the funding agencies. This is a thing which Council decided to have, and the Council, the funding agencies are sitting. Then probably they will have to be made longer, because they cannot exhaust their importance in 3 years. To me, citing DRDs was not to say we need the same thing for software, but we need something with the same message, in which you extrapolate from experiments. You have institutions, you have the researchers participating into long shot R&D. And clearly, if they are doing real work, they need to be funded. This is clear for detectors. If you want to build a piece of hardware, someone has to pay for it. There can be already internal money, but there must be some form of external money. Some DRDs have introduced the common funds, exactly as we have in LHC. So in order to be there, someone, your funding agency, has to pay for the participation. Then clearly, it's not completely clear to me on how many these steps on. For example, if there is a software collaboration which already works, I think they will not like to be externally driven. Let's put it like this. They already feel okay as they are. They think they have enough funds. So this is probably, at least initially, for initiatives which are in troubles and have to try and use new venues of funding. But this is completely to be designed. The message we wanted to understand is whether we can push for something like common software is a success. Common software spares money and person power. We have to go in this direction, and we might need some infrastructure for doing so, which is political, technical, and financial.
Thanks. I think I've always worked common software in HSF and before, so I completely agree that we need common software. It's just that the problem is the devil is in the details. I mean,
clearly,
and we have common software and common computing things like, I don't know, SFT at CERN. We have partly HSF. We have WCG for computing. But then, what do you need? Something different from that? How?
So I think
that's one thing. And the other question I had about DRDs was, are there success stories from the people inside?
It's too early.
So there are things which actually have been launched, and
they are
okay. So
less than 3 years from now. You know, you can. Well, you had the collaboration like RD51 or RD53 before, yes, which eventually came to the design of the chips we are using in luminosity. So, well, that's the level I can tell you that they were successful. Something came out of that.
But these comments about being too complex and slow,
yeah,
is that applying to?
And complex meaning management boards, collaboration boards, all these kind of things.
So is that already not working for the current detector RD?
Well, no, it's working, but they say it's heavy.
Yeah.
So if you can think of something linear, it's probably, I think now it's just to pass a message that something would be appreciated, but then I guess they should come back to our community to say exactly what you need. At least I hope.
I mean, one of the aspects should be maintainability as well. And
it's I didn't really read all the bullets, but
in responsibility.
Yeah.
Long term. I don't know if Liz and Katerina might have had comments to that too. Liz, you can go first.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to give the anti-example of some of us in the audience here remember RD45. So it was a thing before the LHC to have computing and software common projects, right? But the problem with that was they picked a strategy that almost, like everybody went to. I mean, even Babar, so not an LHC experiment. And that kind of was a problem for everybody. Everybody had to recover from wrong technological choices that were made.
You mean objectivity, right?
Indeed, but it was basically, how are we going to store data in early 2000s, 2010, that sort of time frame, right? And they just got it wrong, right? So, and like I said, they affected the whole field because they were trying to make common software. So my cautionary tale for that is that, or at least the lesson I take away from that is, don't make a DRD for computing that picks a technology, make it more about the people and the goals and leave the technology somewhat flexible. I think that it's a very good thing to say that we need common projects. Look at the success of Ruscio and Giant and all of those, right? and if it's been proven in a big way in an experiment, then it's much less risky than, just picking a technology out of the blue and trying to make everybody use it. So I just want us to remember the cautionary tales of the past here before you go down that direction.
Yeah, but as said, Lisa, if this is proposed, this really stays high level, then I hope that people like the one in this room will be asked for opinion. It will not be something imposed from above.
Yeah, good.
Katerina?
Yeah, so I think I'm going in the same direction. I'm in one of the DRDs, and I find it sometimes overwhelmingly complicated for what we're doing. We're just like, okay, we have this little thing that we are trying out. But it's so for DRDs, there's a lot of detector people, there's a lot of technology, and I'm not saying that software is not as complex. It must be, the profile must be raised, but I'm not entirely sure that saying let's duplicate exactly that is the answer. We have the HSF and it's really lean. The beautiful thing is that it's bringing people together. We don't have an arm to do anything like funding wise. That is maybe something that we'll discuss in the future. So how do we ultimately ensure that there is support for the people, there is longer term maintainability? Is R&D the right shape? Maybe it's one of the shapes, but it could be other shapes.
But Caterina, to be frank, DRDs were mentioned because everyone else understands what we're thinking about. So
yeah, but not all funding agencies are buying into that. The UK is not really, as far as I know. So there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of it could work, but will it work? And I think we should think about it very, very carefully. If it's either this or nothing, let's go for this. I mean, if this is what the language that people understand, then sure. I'm a little cautious after having seen it from the inside.
What you're saying is the same message which is shown here. Something common is good, but let's not exactly duplicate the model of DRDs.
Yeah, thanks.
Michel.
Yes, to follow up on this discussion, and in particular after what Liz said, I think that I both agree that to make progress, we need at some point to have some, let's say, forces, manpower funded for the specific task, and we cannot just achieve meet big challenges by people doing it in their spare time. So this is clear, but I think that I completely agree with. From the past, we should really remain this idea, this history of the RD45 and all the mistakes that came out of it. And also, I think that we should, for me, maybe one thing we should say is that to be productive, to have a chance to be a success, let's say an initiative must be connected to the wider community, and one way to achieve it is to ensure that it is in particular connected to the HSF, which is, in my view, the main initiative that we have today, that took years to build, where, let's say, many different parts of the community are meeting together, are discussing, are exchanging ideas, and we ensure that we are not going just in one wrong direction. So, and for me, even if it is different, for me, one thing that has been very successful for me in the last 5 years, for example, with the HSF, is the collaboration between the HSF as an organization that is trying to ensure that everybody, the community at large, is involved in all these discussions for the future, and the IRIS App project in the US, where there were, let's say, a funded project with manpower dedicated to some of this task, and because of this, we are able to make big progress on some of the topics. So clearly, it's not. We are not discussing here having a national project or European project or whatever. So it has to be something different. But I think at some point, whatever is let's say the legal framework used to build this, to fund this set of people, I think at some point one of the things should be it is a set of people, a team of people dedicated to one particular topic that is really well connected to the rest of the community, and in particular to the HSF, which is the main organization existing today.
Yeah, just thanks. I just want to echo what Liz said about the cautionary tales of the past. I think, to make a specific example, I was involved in maybe the successor of RD45, which was the persistency framework. Pool Coral. And I think that, some parts of that, it worked. But I was also responsible for designing some stuff so that more than one experiments would use it. And in the end, this collapsed in the sense that the end people had different ideas about what they wanted to use, and they started using differently, and they converged on using different things. The point is that you cannot impose a solution for everybody, and even if you try to make them use the same solution, they might have good or bad reasons why they want to do things differently. And in the end, these things will emerge because people are people, and they are different, and they may want to do things differently, and you cannot force it. So I think that ease in making something which allows people to do things in common and gives them fun to do it if they want to is important, and which funds projects which are struggling because they don't have enough money and so on. On the other hand, over-designing from the start, that imposing, for instance, one specific example, Tommaso, you said, I don't know, the alpaca sickle thing, we should converge on one or two. No, I disagree. I think that, the same reason why we have we had 4 different lab experiments with Atlas and CMS. It is also because we want to have, don't call it competition, call it area to explore different ideas.
On the other hand, we have the story of TBB, where I think we happily converged.
I know, it's just that in retrospective, it's always easy to say here we should have done things one way, and we were wrong not to do one. But we are also giving you examples where we tried to do things a single one and it didn't work, and yes, we learned things from it, but it's very difficult to predict in advance. That's what I'm saying. And just the last point about, I completely agree. It's nice to have something which is lean. Okay, maybe it's unpopular, but I think even the HSF, it's becoming a bit less lean than it was. And I think we should try to stay as lean as possible, really. But that's personal opinion.
Yeah, Per?
Yeah, I just want to add, it's clear that there are projects that fail and there are projects that are successful. And one example is RD44, which was JAM4. And this is started the same way and the same kind of goals. And I guess we could agree that is a successful. So I don't think because of if you establish this kind of DRDs, it's going to fail. And it's not true. It can also be successful, but I agree. It has to be as lean as possible.
Okay, thanks. There's still plenty of input. We should probably start wrapping up. I'll allow myself one question. I had a few. This is going back to the, as we've all agreed, all important topic of training in couriers. So there we focus on talking about couriers for people that have specialized in computing, want to specialize in computing, and offering training for people who want to do computing, because there's a lot of us who love doing this. But you also, like you pointed out, everything we do in particle as experimental particle physicists uses software. And I was wondering if any part of this mentioned just pushing for more like undergraduate programs.
To be fair, I don't remember. I need to go and read the chapter because we wrote it in August. Possibly, yes, but I'm not sure.
Because I think it's important to have yeah, people who are coming into this field to have a background in computing, otherwise they're not as useful.
I think this message was clearly spelled by the detector guys. They want European level careers path and training and PhDs and this kind of thing. I don't remember if we wrote it, to be very honest, and I will look.
Yeah, I think that's also just so people have like a growing respect for software as well. Okay, great. I don't see any other hands up, and also we've had a nice nice long discussion already. Thanks again.
Thank you.
For this presentation. We can end the meeting.
And I go home with some messages which were important to ask. So let's see what happens.
Great. Okay, thanks. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Do you want this one?
Thanks,
Thank you, Tommaso. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Ciao.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah. Sorry. Apologies, I have to rush to next meeting. Thanks a lot for inviting me.